This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and graphic design. I'm Nick Venice.
I think the post-independence architecture is really the building of the identity of a nation.
On today's program is the second of our 2 episodes dedicated to the Venice Biennale's International Architecture Exhibition.
So it's a space in between absolute privacy and the public world, the space between our individual self and the society outside.
We'll speak with a number of participants who are currently presenting work at the event.
We've just asked the basic question of what does home mean to you, and it's something that everyone can answer that question in many different ways.
Stopping in at the pavilions of Togo, the USA, Australia and Germany.
We really want to make people feel the heat, feel the stress the cities are in.
All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Hello and welcome to today's program, where we continue our whistle-stop tour of some highlights from this year's Venice Biennale International Architecture Exhibition. If you haven't listened to part 1, I'd recommend you do look through the Monocle on Design archive and start there. That was last week's episode, where we unpacked this year's theme of intelligence, natural, artificial and collective. We also visited the permanent pavilions of Brazil, Denmark and Switzerland in the lush confines of the Venice Biennale's gardens. As for today, well, we continue our jaunt around the Biennale Giardini, stopping first at the German pavilion. The focal point of the country's exhibition is rising temperatures in our cities. With the title Stress Test, Germany's curatorial team are making visitors feel the heat, physically and psychologically. Their hope is that we feel the consequences of climate change. I caught up with co-curator Nicola Borgman at the country's permanent pavilion in the Giardini Gardens to find out why emotion is so key to this installation, rather than simply stating the facts.
Our pavilion is less an exhibition, but more a call to action. Everybody knows what's happening. Everybody knows what to do. There are hundreds of architects and landscape architects, planners who know what to do. We have fantastic strategies, we have realized strategies, but everything is too slow. So we have to scale up, we have to be really fast to protect our cities.
So this is less about here are the solutions. You're saying we know the solutions. This is a reminder or like encouraging people to take action now because we need to.
Right, so we want everybody to understand it, so we don't exhibit facts and data, but we really want to make people feel the heat, feel the stress the cities are in. So the title of our exhibition is Stress Test. So we have parts where there's really stress, and we have other parts with de-stress. And it's as easy as that. In the stress parts, it's really getting hot.
There are heat lamps from the ceiling.
Yeah, right. So you really feel the heat from the ceiling, like the sun. So really have your head really heated up. And you see yourself even in the screens, how the body really heats up. And then it's as easy as that. You have the trees on the other side. You have natural ventilation. You have nature. You have evaporation. And that makes cities cool.
So you're really showing the compare and contrast to remind people of why we need to take this action.
And to remind everybody, also people who come here without knowledge before, so even children or whoever is coming will feel that it's really time to act.
There's a soundtrack in the background. We heard some operatic singing before. Explain that for our listeners. This is about emotion.
Yeah, it's about emotion. That's the point. So the whole thing is about feeling and emotion. Actually, we started when we thought about how to really bring things to people. It's not about reading, it's not about knowing. It's only if you really feel it, you will understand it. So there is a gap between knowledge and emotion, and if you don't bring both together, you can't understand. And that's actually, funny enough, what Germans always like to show what their great poets said. So we have a quote from Humboldt writing to Goethe. So we have to go to
Let's go to it. I'm happy to walk in. This is fun. We're going to hear, it sounds like there are some city bells ringing, I think, in the background here.
Right. So here you have it. So it's Alexander von Humboldt who wrote to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, nature must be felt. Those who only observe and abstract They may believe they are describing nature, but they will remain forever strangers to her essence. And that's actually the essence of our exhibition as well. You really feel it, and then you understand everything, and then you act.
And I really like that. There's this connection between, and maybe we'll wander back outside, where it's less atmospheric, although this is wonderful. It's marrying up that emotion and knowledge. Yeah. Because without emotion, you're perhaps less likely to act on the knowledge that you have.
I mean, everybody who once really survived extreme weather catastrophes like floods or extreme heats, they know and they will act. But those who just live in cities like we do in Munich and Berlin, it's pretty much okay, and you always hear, well, 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius. That doesn't really sound too dangerous, but it is dangerous, of course.
You know, you've got tens of thousands of architects and designers coming through here over the next 6 months or so. What do you hope they take away from this? What's your desired outcome for the visitors here?
So not only architects, but also we really also address politics, and they have to take out that politics, all rules really have to change. So we all need a transformation of our cities, and to transform cities, it's not only about architects and landscape architects, because we know in our colleagues, we all know what to do. But we need the support of the governance, and it's not only Germany, it's not only Europe, it's worldwide, of course. And it's also the society. So if people don't go with it, if they don't want the transformation of the cities, it will not happen. They should take away, on the one hand, that there is a real threat and that they feel it, but they shouldn't go and be just shocked. They should be motivated and inspired, because we also show the solutions, the realized solutions. It's in everybody's responsibility to do something against this climate development, and everybody can do something.
My thanks to Nicola Borgman, co-curator of the German pavilion there. We'll be right back after this.
When the sun's out and the mercury rises, there's only one thing to do. Dive into a body of invigorating water. Monocle's new title, Swim in Sun, features the best spots to cool off in. Whether it's a city lido, glamorous beach club, or tranquil lake surrounded by trees, we'll have you dreaming of your next splash. The restorative, life-affirming power of being around water is undeniable, be it through cutting laps at a hotel pool, swimming out to a floating dock, or reclining nearby with a glass of crisp rosé. So sit back, flick through, and discover Monocle's favorite places to take a dip around the world. Featuring beautiful photography, a smart linen cover, and essays penned by our favorite writers. Every page is packed full of inspiration and will leave you feeling salty and sun-kissed. So grab a towel and jump in. The water's just perfect.
Well, we are back, and now we're heading to the Australian Pavilion to check out its exhibition called Home. The focal point of this showcase is a semicircular rammed earth wall and bench, which invites visitors to reflect on their own notions of home and how these narratives might weave with other people's. Curated by an all-Aboriginal team, it examines an important part of the architectural process, listening to everybody from the community to the client. It draws on the storytelling heritage of Australia's Indigenous people. In doing so, it serves as a reminder of how culture, history and ancestry play a role in shaping the value that we place on the built environment. I caught up with the pavilion's co-creative director, Professor Michael Mossman, who set the scene by explaining what the Australian First Nation tradition of yarning really is.
So yarning is coming together and telling these stories about who you are and what's important to you, and then listening very deeply and carefully to what the person with you or the people around you are also telling those same stories, and that you're able to connect with each other. It comes from the word yarn. It's about, these threads. So everyone has a thread that's associated with their story, or multiple threads, but they're all intertwined, and you get some very rich information. We've just asked the basic question of what does home mean to you, and as a universal human quality, having an association with home is something that everyone can answer that question in many different ways.
What has that transpired to physically? What are we looking at?
As a First Nations Australian architect and academic, when we engage with other First Nations peoples, it's always about asking, where is our home, or what is our tribal group? and what's important in that sense. So then we're able to form a relationship based on knowing that information. That's what we want to bring to the world in this pavilion, to come together to unpack that question about what does home mean. That's what we want to bring to the world, to ask that question and to people to think really carefully about what that means. What comes from that is dialogue. So when you share that information with the person next to you, as you're looking at the belongings or as you're touching the rammed earth or the plaster of the living cloak, that you'll be able to engage in a dialogue with someone about what home means. And everyone has a different answer for that. We're really wanting to bring a communication of that aspect and how that can be interwoven in a design sense, so that when we're approaching architecture or landscape architecture or planning or whatever the discipline is, that you're connecting in that particular way about the theme of this pavilion, which is home.
I mean, you mentioned we've got objects and artefacts kind of lining the room. Is the hope that people engage with them, or is it this rammed earth amphitheatre?
What we're wanting to produce is a very inviting encounter as you move from the entry space and into the gallery itself. So with that, it's about creating this rammed earth structure that draws you in.
You've got 10,000 or so more architects coming through here in the coming months. What do you hope they take away from this? What do you hope they incorporate into their practice from experiencing this space?
I think it's about appreciating, like if you're working with particular communities, and what in our experiences it's about working with communities on the periphery. If those situations where you are working with communities like that, it's not an objective exercise, that you're ticking boxes, but you're actually forming relationships. You actually are vulnerable in a sense, so that you're telling your own story as the architect that then might be able to connect at a deeper level with that community who's the user group or the client or will be the end user of that piece of architecture.
So how do we do that? Is it by asking the question of what is home or what is meaningful to you?
Exactly, and it's about just slowing right down at the beginning of the process in order to just establish how we're connected with each other and form those relationships. So the first thing that architects like to do is look at a brief and then start designing, and you get to that first milestone and you ask people for their opinions, and you're sort of going along on a similar trajectory. But what we're trying to establish here is that with that relationship, that client, that user group, that community will become involved as part of that process in a more deeper way. And by establishing this question about connecting with your own cultures, and home is more than just the place where you live. It's about all those ancestries and histories and the cultures and the practices that are part of that as well, that can really bind people and bring people together.
That was Professor Michael Mossman there. We'll be back with more from Venice after the break.
Seeking opportunities, bright ideas and daily analysis? Monocle.com's New Look website has it all and plenty more we think you'll enjoy. For digital-only reporting, fresh opinion and the best from our global team of journalists, Monocle's New Look website is just a click away. To access the online shop, subscribe or log in to our revamped travel guides, head to monocle.com now.
Now, pull up a rocking chair and join us on the doorstep of the United States of America's Pavilion in the Giardini. Here, a temporary porch has been built for the country's exhibition, which is appropriately titled Porch, an Architecture of Generosity. It showcases the breadth in style, type and use of these spaces across the US in a research-led presentation inside the pavilion. This is complemented by the newly finished temporary porch space that will act as a stage for events, activities and performances which will take place in Venice over the coming months. Monocle's associate editor, Grace Charlton, met Peter McKeith, one of the co-commissioners for this year's pavilion. They discussed the importance of the porch in US history and culture and why this space shouldn't be left to steep in nostalgia.
The topic or the concept of porch is a typological approach, which means that it's an identifiable understanding of architecture which was as relevant 500 years ago as it hopefully might be 500 years from now. This way of making architecture and making a porch, let's say 300 years ago, was about addressing floodwater conditions, ground conditions generally, It was about providing a shade structure, addressing immediate conditions of weather and longer-term conditions of climate. So in this sense, we're always working on these ideas, or always working to these issues. I think as architects, we always are, perhaps with varying levels of intensity. But I would say this is what is also remarkable for us as we did the research and reached out across the country through open call, is that there were 400 submissions from across the United States and its territories about people who said, we're working on the porch. It's part of our way of practicing, and it's part of our way of engaging with our communities. So this means different climates, different cultures, different communities, different materials, different labor forces. This is where we were able to have this conversation about architecture and design. In that sense, it rises above the historical moment, and it hopefully is something that we understand. It's just part of, it's almost in our DNA as designers of public spaces to be thinking in this way.
Can you maybe describe this porch in particular? You're working with a very special building in a special town.
Yeah, we're of course working with the backdrop of the existing U.S. pavilion, which is a wonderful neoclassical pavilion from the 1930s. In that sense, rather typical of United States architecture in some ways. And of course, derived from the Palladian traditions of the Veneto and Italy more generally. And what is quite visible in this architecture is the neoclassical portico. Columns, entablature, pediment, everything that I talk to our students about in the classical language, which is, of course, not only symbolic, but spatially about threshold, entrance. Here's where you arrive, and it marks the building. We have simply said, let's pull this to the foreground and bring it forward in contemporary terms. So there are still columns, but they're pulled back. There is still an entablature, so to speak, and a canopy and a pediment, but we have, of course, interpreted this in a different way, much more akin to the porch traditions of the American South, which is why the underside of our canopy is painted blue. This is quite traditional in the American South, certainly at the domestic scale. It's a long, long tradition of blue painted ceilings in these porches. But the message is still the same. Here is where you enter. Here is where you are welcome. Here is where there's accessibility. Here is where hopefully we will be generous and where we understand the world.
I was going to say it's also a place of serendipitous encounters.
Very much so. It's a liminal space, which I find often are the most fascinating spaces in architecture, the spaces in between. So it's a space in between absolute privacy and the public world, the space between our individual self and the society outside, the space between complete shelter and, let's say, the unprotected, not natural world, but the unprotected world. And so this is where, yes, encounters can occur, sometimes structured, formal, other times quite informal and serendipitous, as you say, but where we should be open to possibility and to take advantage of the opportunities generously.
Well, actually, did you grow up with a porch? Is it personal to you?
I grew up on many porches, I could say. I grew up in Houston, I grew up in Seattle, I grew up in Washington, D.C., spent a lot of time in Central Virginia. So there are any number of front porches and back porches and sleeping porches, and my family would often sit on our front doorsteps in the evening time and catch fireflies. And there's, I think for everyone, if the minute you put the word porch in front of them, there's an almost immediate memory. And for some it's very personal and real, and for others it's borrowed from American literature or from American film or from American painting. I have often referred to Kill a Mockingbird, fantastic book, fantastic play, fantastic movie, which more or less occurs on porches, all of it. But there's any number of these references, and again, for many, many people, it's personal. I will say, though, that our porch is not about nostalgia, even if it is about memory. It's also not simply about the historical porch. It's really about the contemporary condition and how the porch as a concept can have value in the contemporary moment at the civic scale. Because what we saw as we began to do this research and this survey, again, north, south, east, and west, the porch is now this civic-scaled approach for libraries and schools and courthouses and housing and every kind of public building type you can. And at some point you say, well, maybe we're actually a nation of porches, and maybe that's the conversation we should have.
Because it's also like protective of weather, like intense rain, intense heat, intense sort of that. So I wonder if it'll become like more and more relevant.
I would say so. I mean, we live in northwest Arkansas, which has very intense rainfall and very intense heat and humidity in the summer. And people live on their porches. I spent 15 years in St. Louis itself in the Mississippi River Valley, heat and humidity, and for up until the invention of mechanical air conditioning, people lived on their porches. So these are tried and true old wisdom.
That was Peter McKeith in conversation with Monocle's Grace Charlton. Finally on today's show, it's over to Togo, who are first-time exhibitors at the Venice Biennale. The African nation is presenting a showcase called Considering Togo's Architectural Heritage. It's an exhibition that celebrates the country's architecture before and after colonisation. The latter features work mostly finished in the 1960s and 70s as impressive examples of African modernism. I met co-curator Jean Autreau-Erdeau of Berlin and Lomé-based Studio NIDA to discuss some of the structures featured. We also talked about what today's architects might learn from these historic works.
We're actually looking at post-independence architecture as well as pre-colonial architecture. So we really wanted to put those both in dialogue and skipping the colonial period, which has been already documented, and rather celebrating the architecture of Togo that was commissioned by the Togolese state. I think the post-independence architecture is really the building of the identity of a nation. So it's a really strong language in those buildings. Like it's telling the pride of a country. It tells the history.
Is there a building we can pick out in the exhibition that you would like to talk to?
Yes, so there is definitely one which is a bit the star of the show, and it's also the one that's the most in danger. Is the Hôtel de la Paix, which was a luxury hotel built in the 70s and which is abandoned for 20 years now, but is really an iconic figure in Lomé landscape. Also today, because it's so original, like it's really eccentric modernism, no? Like it's almost a soft brutalism. There is colors, it's actually ceramic tiles on the facade, so the colors are still really vibrant. The two aisles of the building are coming together in a kiss. There is also a lot of freedom and play in this architecture. And it became a bit also the image of the pop culture in Lomé, because like video clips were filmed here. There is really an hope with this exhibition, with giving this exposure to this building to save it, because it's really on threat of demolition. It's placed on prime real estate.
What can we learn by retaining it? What does this teach either architects or what does it mean to the people of Lomé?
It's losing a part of history for the people of Lomé, but it's really the question of conservation, yes, but transformation as well, because what do you do for this building to be still part of urban life today? So which transformation, which adaptive reuse do we need to program in this building so that it's again a building for the Togolese people on their daily life? Because right now it's just an abandoned site.
What do you hope people take away from visiting this? Is it both wanting to preserve these works but also protect them by using them or reusing them?
We hope that it gives value to this architecture on a global platform as the Biennale, but also really locally in Togo. So that people could understand the value of their own heritage. And also it's a question of appropriation, no? When you see great documentation, when you know about your history, you're able to then integrate the knowledge and reuse that for future. Like I think for the future Togolese architects and builders, it's really important to have a great documentation about their architectural heritage.
We're looking at, again, pre-colonial, but also, I guess, from the 60s and 70s up to the 90s. Where's Togo architecture, Lome architecture going today? How can this work, I guess, be a springboard for your own practice?
What's sometimes a bit difficult is to see like this feeling of going backwards sometimes, because the quality of contemporary architecture is less contextual, there is less finesse than in this modernist era, right? Like we just start seeing towers built in Lome that look the same than they are in London or New York, and yeah, they are not adapted to the context, they are not adapted to their climate. All the architecture, we can learn a lot from it. Regarding the Hôtel de la Paix, we actually, with Studio Neida, have a proposal of an adaptive reuse of this building into a cultural space, design school and artist ateliers, and we really hope that we can convince local authorities to work this way and change the program of this building and giving it back to the population.
My thanks to Jeanne Autreau-Odo. And that's all for today's show. All of these pavilions and exhibitions are open to the public at the Venice Biennale until the 23rd of November 2025. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans. I'm Nick Manise. Thanks for listening.